My parents cut us from Christmas. Mom sneered, your poverty ruins the aesthetic. Understood, I said. The next day they crashed my $8 million estate and my brother's girlfriend suddenly said. I stood in the massive chef's kitchen of my Chicago penthouse, wiping down the flawless marble island with a damp cloth. It was the morning of December 22nd. Down the expansive hallway, I could hear the pure, joyful laughter of my 5-year-old son, Miles, and my 3-year-old daughter, Luna. They were in the brightly lit playroom, busy building a towering castle out of wooden blocks while our nanny, Clara, patiently helped them sort the colors. They were completely safe, entirely happy, and blissfully unaware of the toxic family politics that were about to unfold. My phone buzzed against the marble. The caller ID displayed the name Barbara. My mother. I let out a slow, measured breath before answering. I knew exactly what this call was going to be about. For weeks, the kids had been talking about opening presents with their grandparents in Aspen. For weeks, my mother had been finding every possible excuse to delay the logistics. Listen to me carefully, Veronica, my mother said the second I accepted the call. Her voice was dripping with that familiar, suffocating condescension. You and the kids are not coming to Aspen for Christmas this year. It is simply not going to work out. I did not act surprised. I did not raise my voice. I kept my tone completely flat, devoid of the hurt she was so desperately hoping to hear. Not going to work out, Mom? It is 3 days before Christmas. The kids have their bags packed. Well, you will just have to buy them a new plastic toy and tell them plans changed, she snapped impatiently, lacking even a single ounce of empathy. Your sister Courtney is bringing Donovan. He is a senior executive at a massive investment fund, Veronica. He comes from real money. He's used to high society, not chaotic toddlers running around with sticky hands. So my children are a liability to your holiday aesthetic, I summarized calmly, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the glittering city skyline. Do not put words in my mouth, Barbara hissed defensively. But yes, frankly, you are a liability. We need to project a certain image. A successful, flawless, wealthy family image. Donovan expects perfection. And your whole struggling single mom vibe is just depressing. It will ruin the mood for everyone. You know how hard we have worked to get Courtney into these elite circles. We invested heavily in her future. You, on the other hand, threw your life away the second you got pregnant. You made your bed, Veronica. You cannot expect us to let your messy poverty drag down your sister's one chance at securing a wealthy husband. Your cheap vibe will absolutely ruin the aesthetic. I did not shed a tear. Crying over my mother's rejection was a habit I had violently broken years ago. I see, I replied. We rented a stunning luxury cabin in the mountains, she bragged, her tone lifting as she thought about the grand illusion she was constructing. It cost an absolute fortune. I cannot have you sitting around looking exhausted in last year's sweaters while Courtney is trying to secure a diamond proposal. Just stay home, order a cheap pizza, and watch a movie with the kids. Do not text us. Courtney is highly stressed about making everything perfect. I understand perfectly, Mom, I said, a slow, icy smile spreading across my face. I hope you and Courtney get exactly the Christmas you deserve. Thank you, Veronica. By now, she chirped gleefully, and the line went dead. She genuinely thought she had just successfully discarded the family embarrassment. She had absolutely no idea who she had just hung up on. Part 2, The Shadows of the Past, Target, 700 words. I tossed my phone onto the counter and leaned against the cold marble. My mother's cruel words echoed in the quiet kitchen. A struggling single mom. A depressing vibe. A cheap liability. It is fascinating how families can create a permanent narrative about you and refuse to ever update it, no matter how much the reality changes. To them, I was permanently frozen as the desperate, broke 27-year-old girl who came crying to her parents 7 years ago. I let my mind drift back to that exact day. The day my heart turned into absolute ice. I was pregnant with Miles, completely out of money, and sitting in my parents' lavish living room. I had brought a thick binder containing a flawless, highly detailed business plan for a commercial real estate startup. I was not asking them for a handout. I was simply begging my father, Edward, to act as a cosigner on a modest small business loan. I just needed his signature to secure the bank's trust. Edward had sat in his leather armchair, casually flipping through my meticulous financial projections before tossing the binder onto the coffee table. He had laughed. A deep, mocking laugh that still haunts my memories. He told me that a single mother was the worst possible investment a bank could make. He told me I lacked the ruthless edge required for business. He flatly refused to sign his name, claiming he needed to protect his precious credit score. The very next week, Edward and Barbara went to their bank. They took out a massive home equity line of credit against their primary residence. They did not do this to save a dying relative or fund a medical emergency. They took out a second mortgage to buy my younger sister, Courtney, a brand new luxury Porsche. They bought her a $90,000 sports car simply because she threw a massive tantrum about needing to maintain her lifestyle aesthetic for her social media followers. They financially disowned me to buy a shiny toy for their golden child. I did not break down. I did not surrender. When they threw me out into the cold, I learned how to build my own fire. For the next 7 years, I worked brutal 80-hour weeks. I slept on the hard floor of a freezing, unheated office space. I ate cheap instant noodles while negotiating complex property acquisitions. I channeled every single ounce of my anger, every drop of my family's bitter rejection, into raw, unadulterated ambition. I built Apex Holdings from a tiny, struggling, one-room startup into a ruthless private equity and commercial real estate juggernaut. I did not just survive the financial market, I completely conquered it. And I did it entirely in the shadows, registering every single asset under complex blind trusts and holding companies. To the public, Apex Holdings was a terrifying corporate ghost. And to my family, I was still just the pathetic single mother who barely scraped by. I preferred it that way. It kept their greedy, parasitic hands far away from my empire. Part 3, The Predator's Itinerary, Target, 700 words. My phone buzzed again, breaking my deep reflection. This time, it was a highly secure, encrypted line. I tapped the screen. It was Felix, my executive assistant. "Good morning, Madam CEO," Felix said, his voice brisk and purely professional. "I am calling to confirm that the legal team has officially finalized the paperwork. The hostile takeover of Vanguard Financial is fully executed as of 8 o'clock this morning. You are now the majority shareholder. Their entire executive board is currently locked in a panic room, metaphorically speaking. They are absolutely terrified of the restructuring phase." "Excellent work, Felix," I replied, tracing the edge of a marble counter. Vanguard Financial was a massive, highly aggressive investment fund. It was also the exact firm where Courtney's supposedly wealthy new boyfriend, Donovan, worked as a senior director. It was a minor, insignificant acquisition in my overall multi-billion-dollar portfolio, but the coincidence was highly entertaining. "Tell their board of directors they can sweat it out through the holidays," I instructed smoothly. "I am officially in vacation mode. We will begin the mass executive terminations on January 2nd. "Understood," Felix replied, typing rapidly. "Regarding your vacation, the logistics are perfectly locked in. Your private Gulfstream jet is fueled and waiting at the private terminal. The flight crew is expecting you and the children at 2 o'clock sharp. I also spoke with the estate manager in Aspen. The $8 million house is fully staffed. The temperature is regulated. The custom holiday decorations are up, and the private chef has stocked the pantry with everything Miles and Luna could possibly want." "Thank you, Felix. Have a wonderful holiday," I said, ending the call. I walked down the expansive hallway toward the playroom. The $8 million Aspen estate was my crown jewel. I purchased it 3 years ago under a corporate trust. It sat on 2 pristine acres of snow-covered mountainside on Billionaire's Row, boasting a private indoor theater, a heated infinity pool, and custom architecture. It was the exact type of luxury sanctuary my parents were currently lying through their teeth to pretend they could afford. My mother wanted to play pretend in a rented cabin to impress a man who technically worked for me. I was going to fly my children on a private jet to a sprawling mansion that I actually owned. They thought they were leaving me out in the cold, completely unaware that I controlled the entire winter. ACT 2, The Collision Part 4, The Blizzard and the Bankrupts, Target, 700 words, while my children and I landed smoothly at the private airfield and settled into the massive, warm embrace of our mountain sanctuary, my family was landing in their own personal nightmare. It was the afternoon of December 24th. A severe blizzard was rapidly forming over the Aspen Mountains. The temperature had plummeted to a bitter 15 degrees, and the icy wind was howling through the pine trees. My father, Edward, was gripping the steering wheel of a rented, mid-tier SUV. His knuckles were completely white. Next to him sat my mother, Barbara, aggressively tapping her expensive manicured nails against her designer handbag. In the back seat sat Courtney, already complaining about the poor heating in the car, alongside my older brother Bradley and his girlfriend, Vivian. Vivian was a highly intelligent, 32-year-old mergers and acquisitions lawyer. She had been dating Bradley for 6 months. Bradley had convinced her he was an elite venture capitalist with a massive family trust fund. Sitting in the back of the freezing, cramped vehicle, listening to this family bicker over directions, Vivian was already beginning to suspect she had made a terrible miscalculation. Edward pulled the SUV into the steep driveway of a stunning timber-frame chalet. He trudged through the heavy snow and confidently punched a code into the electronic keypad on the front door. It flashed angry red. He tried again. Red. Barbara rolled down the window, letting the freezing storm inside. "Call the property manager right now, Edward. Donovan's flight lands in a few hours. I need the caterers inside immediately." Edward pulled out his phone, his face turning pale as he spoke to the rental agency. When he finally hung up, he looked like a man walking to his own execution. "The reservation was cancelled," he whispered, his voice trembling over the howling wind. "They said the final authorization failed. The credit cards were declined." "Try the platinum card." Barbara shrieked, panic gripping her throat. "I tried all of them, Barbara. Every single card we have is maxed out or declined. We have absolutely nowhere to stay tonight." The inside of the SUV went dead silent. Then, Courtney exploded into absolute hysterics. She kicked the back of her mother's seat, screaming about how her entire life was ruined. She wailed that Donovan would dump her the second he realized they could not afford a luxury ski lodge. The truth was, Edward and Barbara were completely drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars of toxic debt. They had liquidated their entire retirement accounts to fund Bradley's completely fraudulent cryptocurrency startups. They had taken out high-interest personal loans to maintain Courtney's fake influencer lifestyle. They were entirely bankrupt, playing a desperate game of financial roulette, and the ball had just landed on zero. Bradley, sweating profusely as Vivian watched him with calculating eyes, desperately scrolled through his phone. "Wait," Bradley said, his eyes lighting up with a terrible, desperate idea. "Veronica said she was bringing her kids to Aspen, right? I still have her location shared on my phone from last year. She always settles for cheap budget rentals. We will just go crash her place tonight. She cannot turn family away in a blizzard. I am not sleeping in a filthy shack with screaming toddlers." Courtney spat, her expensive mascara running down her face. "We do not have a choice," Barbara snapped viciously. "We will just lie to Donovan. We will tell him we wanted an authentic, rustic family experience this year. Edward, drive to Veronica's location right now." Part 5, Approaching the Fortress, Target, 700 words. The drive up the treacherous, winding mountain road took 40 agonizing minutes. The heavy snow violently battered the windshield of the rented SUV. Barbara sat with her arms crossed tightly, muttering curses under her breath about how she was going to sue the rental company for emotional distress. Courtney was crying into her silk scarf, terrified that her gold-digging scheme was about to completely collapse. They expected the glowing blue dot on Bradley's phone to lead them to the rundown outskirts of town. They fully expected to pull up to a tiny, drafty log cabin tucked behind a discount grocery store. Instead, Bradley directed his father toward the most exclusive, heavily guarded peak in all of Aspen, known to the locals simply as Billionaire's Row. "Turn left up ahead," Bradley whispered, sounding incredibly confused. "It should be right here." Edward slammed on the brakes. The SUV slid slightly on the black ice before coming to a sudden halt. Towering in front of them, completely blocking the path, was a pair of massive, 10-foot-tall wrought iron security gates. Beyond the frosted metal bars stood an absolutely breathtaking 2-acre estate. It was a masterpiece of modern alpine architecture, constructed from custom-cut Colorado River stone and floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass that glowed warmly against the darkening winter sky. A perfectly plowed, heated driveway swept upward toward a grand entrance. It looked like an impenetrable fortress built for modern royalty. "Your phone is completely broken, Bradley," Barbara snapped, glaring out the window at the sheer magnitude of wealth. Veronica could not even afford the monthly landscaping bill for a place like this. Vivian, however, was not looking at her phone. The sharp corporate lawyer was looking intently at the unique architectural details of the stone pillars. She was studying the specific layout of the heated driveway and the distinct, custom crest permanently etched into the frosted glass of the front door. Her breath hitched in the freezing air. As an M&A lawyer who handled massive acquisitions for elite clients, Vivian possessed a photographic memory for high-value real estate contracts. Before Barbara could suggest calling the police to have Veronica arrested for trespassing, a hidden, high-tech security camera mounted on the stone pillar silently pivoted. It focused directly on the SUV's license plate. A second later, a heavy mechanical click echoed through the storm. The massive iron gates slowly swung open, silently inviting them inside. "Drive, Edward," Barbara ordered, her eyes suddenly widening with a greedy, desperate calculation. "If she is house-sitting for some rich boss, we can just crash here. Whoever owns this place definitely has top-tier champagne and enough empty bedrooms to impress Donovan tomorrow." They drove slowly up the sweeping driveway, their mouths hanging open at the sheer, staggering scale of the property. They parked their cheap rental SUV next to my custom, fully armored black luxury car. The absolute audacity of their assumption was almost poetic. They were about to walk straight into the lion's den, completely convinced they were still the predators. Part 6, The Maid's Bargain, Target, 700 words. As the engine of their rental SUV cut off, I pulled open the heavy oak front door of my mansion. I stood on the threshold wearing a luxurious, $2,000 cashmere lounge set, holding a steaming mug of hot cocoa. I looked down at them from the top of the pristine stone steps with a calm, completely unbothered expression. My family scrambled out of the freezing car, slipping clumsily on the walkway. Barbara immediately began marching toward me. Her face twisted into a demanding, entitled scowl. She was fully prepared to berate me and take over whatever space she believed I was temporarily occupying. But Vivian stepped out of the vehicle and completely froze. She did not look at Barbara. She did not look at Bradley. She stood perfectly still in her designer winter coat, her sharp, intelligent eyes locked directly onto me. Vivian slowly turned her head. The annoyance on her face vanished, instantly replaced by absolute, staggering shock. She ignored Barbara, who was halfway up the steps, and spoke loudly enough to cut right through the howling winter storm. "Wait," Vivian said, her tone commanding total silence. She pointed a trembling finger at the massive estate, then directly at me. "Your terrible family specifically told me you lived in a slum. They told me you were a broke single mother just barely scraping by." Vivian took a slow step forward, her eyes wide with sudden, terrifying realization. "I just processed the blind trust title deed for this exact $8 million Aspen estate for my law firm's top corporate client last week." Vivian paused, letting the heavy, freezing silence fall over the driveway before delivering the final blow. "You are the CEO." Anyone with a shred of decency or normal human awareness would have felt an overwhelming wave of embarrassment. A normal family would have apologized or at least expressed genuine surprise at my massive success. But my family was far from normal. Instead of absorbing the fact that they had spent years mocking a billionaire real estate mogul, my mother simply rolled her eyes. She completely brushed past Vivian's revelation as if it were a highly annoying buzzing mosquito. "Move out of the doorway, Veronica," Barbara snapped, shoving past my shoulder and barging straight into my grand foyer. "It is freezing out here, and I am not catching pneumonia just because you want to stand around playing some sort of dramatic guessing game. Edward, bring the bags inside." Edward did not hesitate. He completely ignored the staggering bomb Vivian had just dropped, grabbed 2 heavy suitcases, and stomped up my steps. Courtney scurried in right behind him, her teeth chattering loudly as she looked around the magnificent entryway with wide, intensely greedy eyes. I closed the heavy oak door behind them, shutting out the howling winter storm. The massive foyer was heated from beneath the polished marble floors. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling. Barbara stood in the center of the room, her high heels clicking aggressively. Her face twisted from initial awe into a mask of deep, furious entitlement. "So you are rich?" Barbara demanded, crossing her arms over her chest as if my success was a personal insult to her very existence. "You have been hiding all of this money from your own flesh and blood while we had to struggle? That is incredibly selfish, Veronica. After everything we have done for you." "What exactly have you done for me, Mom?" I asked calmly, taking a slow sip of my cocoa. "You told me 2 days ago that my children and I were a cheap liability." "Do not change the subject," Edward interrupted loudly, dropping the suitcases onto my pristine floors. "If you really own this place, then you owe us. We raised you. We instilled your work ethic." Courtney had already discarded her soaking wet coat onto a velvet antique chair. "Oh my gosh, this place is actually perfect," she squealed, completely ignoring the tension. "Donovan will be completely obsessed with this house. We can tell him we bought it together as a family investment property." "Are you completely insane?" Vivian finally spoke up, stepping forward and dropping her own overnight bag onto the floor. She stared at my parents like they were a bizarre science experiment. "She just told you that you are not welcome here. She owns this property. You cannot just break into her house and demand to use it to impress some guy." "This is family business, Vivian," Barbara snapped viciously. "You are just a girlfriend and do not get a say." Barbara turned her attention back to me, eyes narrowing with sheer determination. "Listen very carefully, Veronica. Donovan arrives tomorrow. He comes from wealth, and Courtney needs this proposal. Our rental fell through. We are staying here. We are using this house. You will keep your kids hidden, and you will help us. You owe your sister this favor. Do not ruin this massive opportunity for us." I stared at my mother, watching the absolute audacity radiate from her rigid posture. A few hours ago, she had casually tossed my children and me aside. Now, she was standing in my foyer, demanding the keys to my kingdom. My hand drifted toward the security panic button discreetly built into the marble console table. One press, and my armed guards would drag them back out into the blizzard. I was opening my mouth to give the order when a single detail from her unhinged rant echoed in my mind. "Donovan. The wealthy boyfriend. What is Donovan's last name?" I asked, keeping my voice completely neutral. Courtney rolled her eyes. "Sterling," she stated proudly. "Donovan Sterling. He is a senior director at Vanguard Financial. He manages portfolios worth more than you will ever see." A slow, dangerous thrill washed over my entire body. I did not just know Donovan Sterling. As of 8 o'clock this morning, I owned the entire company he worked for. I was literally his ultimate boss. The man my family was desperately trying to impress was currently terrified of the ruthless CEO who had just orchestrated the takeover of his firm. He had absolutely no idea that CEO was me. They were about to build their entire house of cards on a foundation that I personally controlled. "Fine," I said softly, the single word echoing in the massive stone foyer. My mother blinked, taken aback by my sudden surrender. What did you just say? I said fine, I repeated, my voice smooth and laced with a venom they were entirely too arrogant to notice. You want to use my house? You want to pretend this is your luxury estate to impress Donovan Sterling? I will allow it. I will give you the guest wing on the east side of the house. I will instruct my private chef to prepare a 5-star dinner tomorrow night. Courtney let out a loud shriek of excitement. Oh my gosh, finally you are being useful. But there are rules, I continued, holding up a single finger to stop her. If you are going to claim my life as your own, you have to sell it. You cannot break character. I will play the quiet, obedient housekeeper you have always wanted me to be. I will serve the food and pour the wine. Let us see how well you play the part. Do not worry about us, Veronica, Edward puffed out his chest, completely missing the lethal trap I had just laid out. We know how to act with class. You just make sure you stay out of sight. Oh, I will be around, I smiled. As they hurried off like greedy children to claim the biggest bedrooms, Vivian lingered behind in the foyer. She walked past me, lowering her voice so only I could hear. You are going to completely destroy them, aren't you? Vivian asked, her dark eyes gleaming with absolute anticipation. I took another slow sip of my cocoa. I am just giving them the exact Christmas they asked for, Vivian. Please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, leave a comment with the name of the city you are watching from. Every single comment helps this video reach more people and spread the message of standing up for your worth. Thank you so much for your support. Once the family had settled into the guest wing, Vivian followed me into my private study. She didn't waste time with small talk. As an M&A lawyer, Vivian lived on facts and objective reality. She sat on the edge of the mahogany desk, her sharp eyes scanning the room, landing on the subtle signs of true power, the encrypted servers in the corner, the high-level legal briefs, and the lack of any need to show off. Veronica, tell me the truth, Vivian said, her voice low and precise. I have spent the last 6 months listening to Bradley brag about his trust fund and his incredible family wealth. But today, I watched your parents' credit cards get declined at a mid-tier car rental, and now they are squatting in your mansion. What is really going on here? I sat behind my desk, lacing my fingers together. Vivian, you are a corporate attorney. You deal in ledgers and asset transparency. So, let me give you the exact financial breakdown of the family you are currently dating into. I didn't sugarcoat it. I explained that my parents didn't have a trust fund or a real estate empire. What they had was a comfortable upper-middle-class retirement account that they completely liquidated 3 years ago. Barbara and Edward had spent every single cent to fund Courtney's Paris degree and her downtown apartment, all to maintain an influence aesthetic she hadn't earned. But the real drain, I explained, was Bradley. Bradley is not a venture capitalist, Vivian, I said, watching the realization wash over her face. He lost his entry-level finance job 2 years ago for gross incompetence. Since then, he has been convincing our parents to take out massive equity loans on their primary home in Boston to fund his failed cryptocurrency startups and his luxury car leases. He told them he was on the verge of $1 million payout. Instead, he blew through their entire safety net. The reason my mother's cards bounced today is because they are entirely maxed out. They are hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Bradley is a broke fraud, Vivian. He has been lying to you since the day you met. Vivian closed her eyes for a long moment, taking a slow, deep breath. When she opened them, the warmth was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. She realized she had been paying for their expensive dinners because Bradley claimed his assets were tied up in aggressive portfolios. His assets are tied up in his mother's purse, I corrected gently. And that purse is now empty. He is nothing but a parasite feeding off the last scraps of their credit. Vivian let out a sharp, bitter laugh. She wasn't just Bradley's girlfriend anymore, she was a brilliant woman who realized she was being conned, and she was ready for blood. She looked at me and connected the dots. She knew I owned the firm that Donovan worked for. she knew I was setting a trap. "I want in," Vivian stated firmly. "Whatever you need tomorrow, Veronica, you have my complete cooperation. I want a front row seat when this entire house of cards collapses." We shook hands. The alliance was sealed. My family thought they had successfully hijacked my home, completely unaware that the two smartest women in the house were already orchestrating their absolute destruction. The next morning passed in a whirlwind of frantic, delusional preparation. My family scrambled to construct a perfect illusion of old money wealth. Courtney spent 4 hours on her makeup to achieve an effortless look. My father, Edward, rehearsed fake investment strategies out loud, while Bradley tried to order my actual private chef to leave the premises before Donovan arrived. At exactly 6 o'clock, the security chime echoed through the mansion. A sleek black car rolled up the heated driveway. Panic erupted in the foyer. "He is here!" Courtney shrieked, sprinting down the stairs in an evening gown that probably cost more than her parents' monthly mortgage payment. "Everyone get into position. Dad, stand by the fireplace." Barbara rushed into the kitchen and shoved a plain white apron into my chest. "Put this on right now," she hissed, her eyes darting around the spotless room. "You are the hired help tonight, Veronica. Do not speak unless spoken to. Keep my wine glass full and serve from the left. If you drop a single plate or embarrass us, I will make sure you regret it." I calmly tied the apron over my expensive cashmere sweater, making sure the fabric covered my custom diamond Rolex. "I understand completely, Mom," I replied, my voice perfectly submissive. "I will make sure tonight is absolutely unforgettable." Edward pulled open the heavy oak door with a wide, practiced smile. Donovan Sterling stepped into the warm light of the foyer. He was a tall, sharp-looking man in his late 30s, carrying himself with the rigid posture of a high-level executive. I recognized him instantly from his employee file. He was ambitious, intelligent, and completely oblivious to the trap he had just walked into. "Donovan, my boy." Edward boomed, extending a hand. "Welcome to our little mountain sanctuary. It is wonderful to finally meet the man Courtney has been raving about." Donovan shook Edward's hand, his eyes scanning the vaulted ceilings and the priceless artwork. "You have a stunning home, sir," Donovan said, clearly impressed. "Courtney mentioned your family was in real estate, but this property is on a completely different level." Barbara stepped forward, practically glowing with smug satisfaction. "Oh, you know how it is, Donovan," she laughed, waving her hand dismissively. "Edward and I have spent decades building our commercial portfolio. It takes an incredible amount of sacrifice to maintain a lifestyle like this. We bought this property as a quiet sanctuary away from our busy corporate lives." I stood in the shadows of the hallway, smoothing down my apron. Listening to my bankrupt father brag about his fictional business acumen while standing in the house I bought with my own hard-earned money was almost too delicious to interrupt. The stage was set. The actors were blindly playing their parts, and I was ready to serve the first course of their destruction. I followed the group into the formal parlor a few minutes later, carrying a heavy silver tray loaded with seared scallops and caviar. The parlor was a masterpiece of modern Alpine design, featuring exposed timber beams salvaged from a 19th-century French barn. My father, however, was treating it like a cheap museum exhibit he had skimmed a brochure for. As I entered, Edward was waving his glass of scotch toward the ceiling. "We actually imported these wooden beams directly from a local lumberyard down the street," Edward lied loudly. "I told the contractor I wanted that rustic cabin feel." "And those stones for the fireplace?" "Barbara and I personally picked them out of a dusty quarry in Texas." Donovan nodded slowly, looking up at the ancient, weathered French oak beams that clearly did not come from a local hardware store. He looked mildly confused by the Texas quarry claim, but he remained polite. "It is a bold vision for interior design, Edward," Donovan observed tactfully. Courtney clung to Donovan's arm, giggling. "Oh, Daddy is a total visionary. He has such an eye for expensive things. Wait until you see the artwork we have collected." Edward puffed out his chest and walked over to the centerpiece of the room, a stunning, authentic 19th century oil painting I had acquired at an exclusive auction in London. It was worth more than my parents' entire previous retirement fund combined. "This piece right here is my absolute favorite," Edward proclaimed, gesturing grandly at the canvas. "We bought it during a luxury family trip to Italy. It is an original piece by the famous Italian painter, Giovanni Battista. Cost me an absolute fortune, but you simply cannot put a price tag on true European sophistication." I stepped forward gracefully, lowering the silver tray onto the coffee table. I arranged the linen napkins with practiced precision, keeping my face serene. "Actually, sir," I spoke up, my voice calm and crystal clear, cutting through Edward's absurd fabrication. "The artist is Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot. He was a highly regarded French landscape painter, not Italian. And this specific piece belongs to his late period, characterized by the silvery, feathered brushstrokes you see near the horizon line. It is a textbook example of the historic Barbizon school movement." The entire room went dead silent. Edward froze, his glass of scotch hovering near his mouth. Courtney glared at me with such intense burning hatred I was surprised my apron didn't catch fire. Barbara looked like she was about to have a medical emergency. Donovan, however, turned away from the painting and looked directly at me. His eyes widened in genuine surprise. He stepped closer to the canvas, inspecting the brushstrokes exactly where I had pointed. "You are absolutely right," Donovan said, turning back to me with a new level of respect. "I studied art history in college, and Corot is one of my favorites. I cannot believe I didn't recognize it. That is incredibly impressive knowledge for a housekeeper. You certainly know your fine art." I smiled politely, my hands folded neatly. "I am just very passionate about the historical details, sir. Much like the architecture of this room. The timber beams above you are actually reclaimed oak from an 1840s estate in Lyon, France, which complements the thermal mass of the Colorado River stone used in the fireplace. It creates a highly efficient passive heating system." Donovan stared at me, captivated by the effortless way I had deconstructed the room. He looked back at my father, whose face was rapidly turning the color of a ripe tomato. "Fascinating," Donovan murmured. "Well, Edward, you clearly hire top-tier staff. She knows far more about your house than you do." Edward let out a strained, awkward laugh. "Yes, well, we pay her very well to memorize the brochures." "Thank you, Veronica. You are dismissed to the kitchen now." I offered a professional nod and turned on my heel. I could feel Donovan's eyes following me. The seed of doubt was firmly planted. The grand illusion was beginning to crack, and we hadn't even made it to the dining room yet. The heavy tension from the parlor lingered in the air like a suffocating blanket as we moved into the formal dining room. The mahogany table was beautifully set for six, glittering with expensive crystal under the warm glow of the chandelier. Courtney was visibly on edge. She glared at me as I approached her side of the table to pour a vintage Bordeaux. "Watch the glass," she snapped loudly, making sure Donovan was paying attention. Honestly, good help is so hard to find. You have to explain the simplest tasks repeatedly. It reminds me of this incompetent assistant I fired last month. She was a pathetic single mother, always distracted. People like that simply do not understand what it takes to survive in a high-stakes environment. I kept my face blank, expertly pouring the wine. Before I could move away, Vivian leaned forward, her sharp, calculating eyes locked directly onto Courtney. "That is fascinating, Courtney," Vivian said, her tone polite but laced with razor-sharp precision. "Bradley told me so much about your success as an influencer. As a corporate attorney, I find the actual business mechanics of digital branding highly intriguing. Tell me, which specific talent management agency currently represents your brand portfolio?" Courtney froze, her wine glass halting halfway to her lips. She blinked rapidly, clearly not expecting a pop quiz on the career she had entirely fabricated. "Oh, well, I actually prefer to remain strictly independent," Courtney stammered with a weak laugh. "Agencies take too much of a percentage." Vivian tilted her head, adopting the exact expression she used when dismantling a hostile witness. I see. But without an agency, managing high-level brand deals must be a logistical nightmare. What is your current engagement rate on sponsored posts? Bradley mentioned you pull in 6 figures a month, which means your conversion metrics must be staggering. Who handles your corporate tax structuring for that freelance income? Are you registered as an LLC or an S-corp? The color rapidly drained from Courtney's face. She looked frantically toward Barbara, who suddenly seemed very interested in her caviar. I do not really deal with the boring math stuff, Courtney deflected, her voice climbing to a defensive pitch. I have an expensive accountant for that. I focus on the creative vision. Donovan knows how it is. You hire smart people for the details. Donovan chimed in, looking at Courtney with a slight frown. Actually, Courtney, even the most creative founders I work with know their baseline metrics. If you are generating 6 figures monthly, your tax liability alone would require you to be intimately familiar with your corporate structure. Courtney opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked exactly like a deer caught in headlights. Bradley jumped in, desperately trying to save her. Let's not talk about stressful business at the dinner table. We are here to celebrate. Vivian smiled a cold, victorious smile. Of course, Bradley. I just admire independent businesswomen. It takes a special kind of person to build an empire from scratch. Isn't that right, Veronica? I finished pouring the last glass of wine, stepping back with perfect posture. It certainly requires a level of authenticity that very few people possess, Miss Vivian, I replied respectfully. I retreated to the edge of the room, watching the uncomfortable silence smother the table. Donovan was now staring at Courtney, the romantic admiration in his eyes cooling into deep suspicion. Edward, desperate to regain control of the room, cleared his throat loudly. He shifted his weight in the heavy chair, steering the conversation away from Courtney's non-existent business and toward Donovan. So, Donovan, Edward began, adopting a deep tone of masculine camaraderie. Tell us about the high-stakes investment world. I imagine a man in your senior position deals with incredible stress, especially in today's volatile market. You must be managing some massive accounts. Donovan seemed relieved to discuss something real. He leaned back, taking a slow sip of his water. You have no idea, Edward, Donovan sighed. Actually, it has been an absolute nightmare at the firm lately. We just went through a massive, highly aggressive hostile takeover. As of 8 o'clock this morning, Vanguard Financial is no longer an independent entity. We were completely bought out by Apex Holdings. Bradley let out an impressed whistle, pretending to understand the gravity of the situation. I carefully placed a steaming plate of roasted duck in front of Barbara, making my movements silent and invisible. It is not just the buyout that has everyone on edge, Donovan continued, his voice dropping as if he were discussing a dangerous predator. It is the CEO of Apex Holdings. She is an absolute ghost in the media, refusing all interviews. But in the boardroom, she is known as a terrifying, ruthless genius. She started with a tiny portfolio a few years ago and built a massive empire that swallowed us whole in weeks. Our entire executive board is terrified of her. We know she is planning a massive restructuring right after the holidays, and heads are absolutely going to roll. Courtney reached out and patted his arm sympathetically. Oh, babe, that sounds stressful, but you are brilliant. They would never fire someone with your track record. Donovan shook his head, looking genuinely worried. You do not understand how she operates, Courtney. This CEO does not care about past accomplishments or old money connections. She only cares about absolute perfection and raw intelligence. I am desperate to secure a meeting with her just to prove my value, but she is unreachable. She is currently spending the holidays at one of her private estates, probably plotting her next billion-dollar acquisition while the rest of us sweat it out. Edward let out a booming, arrogant laugh. Well, Donovan, he proclaimed loudly, slicing into his duck. It sounds to me like this new boss of yours could use a little seasoned veteran guidance. These young real estate hotshots always think they know everything until the market turns on them. If she ever needs some solid practical advice on how to manage a portfolio without burning out her top executives, you just send her my way. I would be more than happy to teach her a few things about the real world of high-level business. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from bursting into laughter. The sheer blinding arrogance of my bankrupt father offering to mentor the billionaire CEO who currently owned his mortgage and his daughter's boyfriend's entire career was the greatest Christmas gift I could have ever asked for. I glanced at Vivian. She had her napkin pressed over her mouth, her shoulders shaking slightly as she silently laughed at the incredible irony. The dinner progressed, the tension simmering just below the boiling point. Courtney was drinking her wine much faster than anyone else, trying to overcompensate for her lack of business knowledge by acting increasingly arrogant. She laughed too loudly at Edward's jokes and constantly touched Donovan's arm, but I could see Donovan pulling away. His analytical mind was evaluating the chaotic family he had been introduced to. Courtney felt him slipping out of her grasp. She desperately needed a scapegoat to reassert her dominance. I stood near the archway, waiting, when Courtney aggressively snapped her fingers at me. "Bring me more wine," she demanded loudly, her voice slurring slightly. "And do not just stand there like a useless statue. You are supposed to be working tonight." I kept my face blank and walked toward the table. As I leaned in to carefully pour the wine, Courtney suddenly jerked her elbow backward with deliberate force. Her arm slammed into my wrist. The heavy crystal wine glass tipped over and shattered against the edge of the table. A massive wave of dark red wine splashed across the polished wood, soaking the front of my white apron and seeping into my cashmere sweater. The sound of breaking crystal echoed loudly. Vivian pushed her chair back to avoid the spill. Bradley let out a surprised gasp. Barbara sighed, rolling her eyes. But Courtney did not apologize. She stood up, her face twisted into a mask of intoxicated superiority. "Look what you did, you clumsy idiot!" Courtney screamed, pointing at me. "You are completely incompetent. I asked for a simple glass of wine, and you managed to ruin everything. This is exactly why you are a pathetic single mother struggling to survive. You have absolutely no class and no idea how to exist in a high-value environment. You are nothing but the hired help, Veronica. Clean up this mess right now before I have you thrown out into the snow." The dining room plunged into a suffocating silence. Donovan stared at Courtney in absolute horror. The delicate mask of the sweet woman he had been dating had completely melted away, revealing the toxic person underneath. I looked down at the dark red stain with absolute indifference. Then, I reached behind my waist and slowly untied the strings of the cheap white apron. I pulled the stained fabric over my head and let it drop casually onto the floor, right on top of the shattered crystal. I picked up a clean linen towel, calmly wiped my hands, and tossed it onto the table. I slowly rolled up the sleeves of my ruined sweater, exposing the custom diamond Rolex gleaming on my left wrist. I straightened my spine, letting my shoulders pull back into the rigid commanding posture I used when negotiating billion-dollar contracts. The subservient housekeeper persona vanished, replaced by the terrifying CEO I truly was. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I ignored my screaming sister. I ignored my panicked parents. Instead, I slowly turned my head and locked my eyes directly with Donovan Sterling. The sheer dominant intensity of my gaze pinned him to his chair. Donovan stopped breathing. Without the visual distraction of the cheap apron, he was forced to look at me as his absolute superior. His eyes darted from my face to the diamond Rolex. His color violently drained away, leaving his skin a sickly shade of gray. His brain connected the dots, the art knowledge, the estate, the absolute lack of fear. Donovan pushed himself away from the table with so much force his chair tipped backward and crashed onto the marble floor. "Oh, babe, you do not have to yell at her," Courtney cooed, reaching for his sleeve. "My parents will handle it. We will just have her pack her things and leave." Donovan violently snatched his arm away. He didn't even look at her. He executed a rigid, respectful bow toward me, the kind of motion a terrified employee gives to a superior who holds their entire future in her hands. "Madam CEO," Donovan stammered, his voice a trembling whisper. "I had absolutely no idea this was your private residence." The words hung in the air, heavy and lethal. Barbara let out a sharp, confused gasp. Edward froze his glass of scotch halfway to his mouth. Courtney let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh, failing to process the reality. "What are you talking about, Donovan?" Courtney asked, her voice cracking. "What do you mean, CEO? This is just Veronica. She is my broke sister." "You are confused." Donovan finally snapped. He turned and glared at Courtney with absolute disgust. "Shut your mouth right now, Courtney. Do you have any idea who you are talking to? She is the founder of Apex Holdings. She is the billionaire who just bought my entire company this morning. She is my ultimate boss." He turned back to me, his hands shaking. "I am so incredibly sorry, ma'am. I was brought here under entirely false pretenses. I was told this family owned this estate. I had no idea they were treating you this way in your own home." I let the silence stretch for a painful moment, savoring the terror. I looked at Donovan calmly, letting a slow, cold smile curve my lips. "It is quite all right, Donovan. You were brought here under false pretenses, but you are going to stand exactly where you are, because we are going to have a very important discussion about the company you keep." Courtney threw her head back and let out a shrill laugh. "Oh my gosh, you are so funny, Donovan. You actually looked terrified. That was a good prank, but stop now. Natalie is not a CEO. She is literally cleaning up my spilled wine." Donovan stared at her as if she had grown a second head. "Look at her wrist, Courtney," Donovan demanded. "That is a custom piece commissioned exclusively for the executive founders of Apex Holdings. There are only 3 in the world. I know because I spent my morning reading the corporate mandate she personally signed to authorize the takeover of my firm." Edward tried one last desperate attempt. "Donovan, surely there is a mistake. My daughter was struggling to pay her bills last year." "Edward, you are absolutely delusional," Donovan snapped. "I saw her signature on the acquisition documents today. I saw her corporate portrait in the confidential briefing files. There is no mistake. You people are living in an absolute fantasy world." Donovan began pacing, his fury directed at Courtney. "I have spent months trying to secure a promotion, and you just brought me into the private home of the woman who owns the entire board of directors, and you made me watch you treat her like garbage. You just committed corporate suicide on my behalf." The sheer force of his anger finally shattered Courtney's delusion. She collapsed into her chair, her hands trembling so violently she knocked over her water glass. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. She saw the cashmere, the posture, and the cold, unbothered expression. The truth crashed down on her. I wasn't the family scapegoat anymore. I was the billionaire she had been pretending to be. Barbara let out a strangled gasp, her hands flying to her cheeks. Every piece of the puzzle finally snapped into place for her, and it horrified her. Vivian leaned forward, a slow, brilliant smile spreading across her face. "Well, Bradley," Vivian said quietly. "It looks like your sister really is a self-made woman after all, just not the one you were bragging about." Edward, seeing the massive wealth he had been trying to fake was sitting right across from him, suddenly morphed into a proud father. "Now, Donovan," Edward said with forced warmth. "There is no need to panic. We were simply playing a little family joke to test your character. We wanted to make sure you weren't just after Courtney for our wealth. Veronica is our absolute pride and joy. She inherited her business mind directly from me." Barbara hurried to my side, though I pulled my arm away. "Oh, absolutely. Our daughter is an absolute genius. We are a deeply close-knit family. What is ours is hers, and obviously, what is hers is ours." Vivian stood up slowly, radiating authority. "Actually, Edward, that is not accurate. You are not a close-knit family. Exactly 3 years ago, Veronica asked you to co-sign a modest startup loan. You flatly refused and told her she was a terrible investment. And then the very next day, you took out an equity loan to buy Courtney a Porsche. You legally and financially disowned Veronica because you said her single mother lifestyle was an embarrassment to your social standing. Barbara gasped. Bradley buried his face in his hands. Vivian turned her fierce gaze toward my mother. You didn't raise a billionaire, Barbara. You threw out a struggling single mother to protect your fake aesthetic. Natalie built this empire entirely on her own while you were going bankrupt trying to fund Courtney's fake influencer career. You do not own a single brick of this house. Barbara slid off her chair, her knees hitting the marble with a heavy thud. She was crying genuine, desperate tears of terror. Veronica, please. You have to help us. We are completely broke. The rental took the last of our credit. We don't even have money for gas to get to the airport. The bank is threatening to foreclose on the house in Boston. If you don't help us, we will be on the street. You should have thought about that before you liquidated your retirement for luxury vacations for a daughter who treats everyone like garbage, I said, looking at Courtney. Vivian placed her designer briefcase on the table and pulled out a heavy manila folder. I took it and slid it to Edward. Open it, I commanded. Edward scanned the documents, his face turning hollow. What is this? That is the original title deed to your house in Boston, I explained. Your bank grew tired of your missed payments and sold your toxic loans to a private debt collection firm. And as it turns out, my holding company recently acquired that firm. I don't need to give you a loan, Dad. I already own your entire life. I am your bank now. And my legal team has the final eviction paperwork ready to file first thing Monday morning. The silence was broken only by my mother's sobbing. Bradley stood up, his face flushed with misplaced rage. You are completely out of line, Veronica. You are acting like a ruthless dictator. These are our parents. You need to call off your lawyers right now. Vivian looked at him with absolute disgust. Sit down, Bradley. You are not defending your family, you are panicking because your automatic teller machine has been shut down permanently. You are a 33-year-old man who lets his parents steal from his sister. I do not date spineless frauds. Vivian slid the diamond promise ring off her finger and dropped it into Bradley's wine glass with a sharp clink. She picked up her briefcase and walked out of the room without looking back. Courtney sat frozen, staring at the space where Donovan had been. Her fake career was exposed, her rich husband was gone, and her parents were bankrupt. I am protecting the aesthetic, Mom, I said, looking down at Barbara. My children will never be exposed to the toxic bankrupt reality of this family. Get up off my floor and get out of my house. I nodded to the lead security guard. Instantly, four massive men in black suits stepped forward. They hauled Edward up from his chair and lifted Barbara off the floor. Get your hands off me! Barbara shrieked as they escorted her toward the foyer. We have nowhere to go. You cannot do this. Bradley walked out on his own, a hollow, broken man. Courtney lashed out at a guard, screaming about how she was an influencer, but he simply marched her out. A few moments later, the heavy sound of the front doors slamming shut resonated through the estate. The cold winter wind had officially swallowed them whole. I stood in the profound silence, feeling a massive weight lifted from my shoulders. I turned and walked into the formal parlor. Vivian was sitting by the fireplace with a fresh cup of tea. I thought you called a car for the airport, I said. Vivian smiled. Flights are grounded until morning. I figured the CEO of Apex Holdings might have a guest room for the lawyer who just helped her execute the most flawless family eviction in history. I laughed. It was a genuine laugh. You are more than welcome, Vivian. The quiet was broken by rapid footsteps. Miles and Luna came bounding down the stairs in their pajamas, their movie marathon over. Mommy! The movie was so awesome! Miles shouted. I caught Luna in my arms, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. they were safe. They hadn't heard the screams or seen the broken glass. They were untouched by the darkness of my own childhood. As I sat on the rug by the fire with my children and my new friend, I realized that family is not determined by genetics. Blood makes you related, but respect and unconditional love make you family. I had lost a toxic group of people, but I had secured absolute peace of mind for the first time in 34 years. The house always wins, and I am the house. The storm outside was freezing, but inside, I had never felt warmer. Still, a part of society would say I was too cruel to my own blood, orchestrating their financial ruin and throwing them out into the snow on Christmas Eve. Am I wrong for finally executing the ultimate eviction, or did they get exactly the holiday they deserved? Thank you for watching. If you found this story powerful, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of reclaiming your power and setting unapologetic boundaries. Every single subscriber helps us grow and tell more stories like this one. Stay strong, and always know your true worth.